Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be doing a book review, and today's book is going to be The Girl and the Moon by Mark Lawrence. Really quick, before we get started, I just want to do another reminder of the upcoming Q&A for our celebration for over 1,000 subscribers. Thank you to everybody who is subscribed. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions you would like me to answer, please leave them down below or on the Discord or just somewhere. Get them to me so that way I can include them in the Q&A. It can be fantasy and reading related, or it can be a personal related question. I don't mind either way. Just whatever you are interested about, go ahead and ask, and I will try to the best of my ability to answer it in an upcoming Q&A, which should be out within the next couple of weeks. And as well, if you are not subscribed and you would like to become a subscriber, that would be really great for you to join our little crew here. Our community is always open for new people, so please join, talk about fantasy with us, and if you like this review, give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it, and it does help support the channel. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with this review. Spoiler warning, it's not going to be too heavily a spoiler of the actual book itself, but this is book 3 of a series. So if you have not read books 1 and 2, which I have done reviews on the first 2 books, which I will make sure to leave linked down below for you, I would recommend starting with book 1 because they are progressive and the story is one long big story. So if you jump in on number 3, some things from 1 or 2 might be spoiled for you, and if you want to start with the series, it is best to start with book 1, otherwise you might be very confused. And so yeah, I would recommend starting with that instead. Now, this book starts right after the second book ends, with the group arriving at the Green Lands. And yeah, so we start basically right away where we were at. We don't have any missing time, and it gets started right into what happens when they're discovered there and how the whole story ends. So this will be a finishing book. It is a trilogy, and we do see the end of the story by the end of this book. So what did I like about The Girl in the Moon? I do think that it is pretty surprising. I don't think that this story is, like I've really seen this kind of story before. I do think it's original, not really following a formula or obvious plot lines, and that is really refreshing. I do think in general this book is new and interesting in its concepts and in the world. But even just the plot lines of like where we're going was very surprising to me. I didn't really feel like I could guess, or sometimes even I kind of wondered why we're going in these different directions. Of course, it all leads back to the end, and we do have see what the end result is by the end of this book, but it is very convoluted of how we get to places, and I do think that that's really nice to have something that is original and new and not something that is kind of more formulaic or something that we expect. So I did really like that. I also really like the characters' growth and progression. We have several different main characters. Even though we have like mostly one main character, we have several characters that are very close to that main character, and we really see progression and see and learn more about these characters throughout this story. And I think we did a good job of like bringing them to the end of their journey. And again, last but not least, I do really like this world. I've always liked this world. I've always found it interesting. This one kind of borders between a sci-fi and a fantasy, in the fact that there's a lot of fantasy qualities, but there is lots of sci-fi qualities as well. So it is an interesting mix, and I do enjoy how the two are melded together and how that formed this world and the conflicts that they're going through. So definitely, if you want something unique and interesting in terms of world and in terms of how things work, this is a really good series, and it continues forward in this book because we really learn new things about a new area of this world. We learn about how it relates to the other areas of the world, and it's really all interconnected. So really interesting, really complex, and continues to grow even in this last stage of the journey. On the other hand, though, what did I not like as much about this book? I didn't really like the sense, I didn't really feel like a sense of accomplishment or success by the end. And that's really what I wanted. So I don't want to spoil anything for you, obviously, so I'm not going to really talk too much like in depth about why this is the case. But for me personally, the way that this book ended, it didn't really feel like a satisfying ending, which might be kind of confusing. If you have read it, let me know if you feel that same sense or same feeling, because it does conclude, and it's not a bad conclusion, at least in terms of what you might think a bad conclusion is, but I just don't feel like I got the conclusion in the way that I was hoping for, and so that didn't mesh with me and make me feel accomplished. Sorry if that's convoluted and hard like to follow, since I'm trying really hard not to spoil anything or make you have a preconceived notion of anything. But I guess the easiest way to say it is the ending was not what I expected, and because I didn't get what I expected, I felt a little bit let down by it, if that makes sense. But of course, that is a personal problem and not necessarily a hindrance of the book. It really just depends on how you feel about the ending. And I mean, in general, the plot was pretty convoluted in its finale. Like, as I mentioned earlier, it is something that's kind of still developing and going different directions and being very surprising. And I think, though I liked the surprising part, the ending did not just get quite where I was hoping it would go. The second thing I didn't like as much is the book felt longer than the previous books. I'd have to double check. I don't remember if it is actually a longer book than the other ones in terms of pages, but it felt longer. It felt like it dragged out. It felt like I was slogging through this story a little bit more than the other ones. I think, again, it might just be because it went in a lot of different directions. It was kind of convoluted in how we were getting to the ending of the story, and maybe that just didn't mesh well. So I enjoyed the surprisingness of it, but at the same time, I felt like I was pulling myself through this story to try and find out how this was all going to end. And it might, again, just be a me thing and not a story itself thing, but for me personally, I felt like this book was much more less like super exciting, and like I wanted to find out what happened next, and more like, okay, I'm just trying to get through all these events that are taking place. So that's just how I felt about it. If you've read it, please let me know how you feel about it, as well as the ending and reading it, just because I'd be interested to have a conversation about if you feel differently and why you feel differently. Something that's just a comment I want to make that's very neutral, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just something I thought would be good to bring up, is that it is a little bit confusing at the beginning if you haven't read books 1 and 2 or at least book 2, very close to book 3. I took me a second, because I haven't read book 2 in a while when I read this one, to really catch up on what's going on and remembering all the details and all the things that are kind of important to remember in order to move forward with the book. So I would just, in my opinion, read book 2 and jump right into book 3 now that book 3 is out, or reread book 2, potentially book 1 and book 2, in order to move into book 3, just because that would help you with being fresh and not having to have a learning curve also thrown in there, because you're trying to remember exactly what happened in the previous book and exactly how things work. So again, that's just me, not good, not bad, just something I observed when I was starting to read this book. So overall, would I recommend it? I think that if you enjoyed book 1 and 2, you should definitely read book 3. You'll get this ending that you are probably looking forward to if you've read the first 2 books. You will want to know how it concludes. I do think that it does have an interesting world. It does have interesting points in it. You do learn more about these characters. So I do think that it is worth giving a shot if you've read the first 2 books and you do like it. I do think that it might not be exactly what you expect. At least that's how it was with me. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it can be up to you on whether you think that the author took it in a great direction or if you think that he should have done things differently. And that might be something that is interesting for you to just discover on your own as well. So, of course, if you haven't read books 1 and 2, don't worry about book 3. Start with book 1 and book 2. If you read book 1 but you didn't like book 2, then maybe number 3 is not for you either. Again, this is just if you want a conclusion. Since it is a trilogy, it really is very much based on how you felt about books 1 and 2. But overall, I do think it was a good book. I do think it's good quality, and I do think that if you're wanting to know how things worked out, you should take the time to read book 3. All right, I guess that is it for what I have to say about this book today. Again, please let me know if you have read it, what you think of it. If you're planning to read it and haven't read it yet, please let me know your thoughts and what you think about what I have mentioned and what you might be thinking about when going into book 3. I just love to have a conversation about it with you. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.